The dawn breaks early on a farm. That is something city people never quite understand until they live it. Every morning for the past 15 years, I have risen before the sun to begin my daily routine on the 20 acres my grandfather left me. The property is not fancy by any means. A modest two-bedroom farmhouse with a large barn, several outbuildings, and pastures divided by sturdy fencing that has stood the test of time. My pride and joy, besides the land itself, is my small herd of cattle, especially Thor, my prize black Angus bull. Thor is magnificent, nearly 1 ton of muscle with a surprisingly gentle temperament unless his territory is threatened. He follows me across the field each morning, his deep brown eyes watching my movements as I check the fence line and fill the water troughs. The morning light catches on his glossy black coat as he moves with a grace that belies his massive size. People misunderstand bulls. They are not mindless, aggressive creatures, but thoughtful animals with strong protective instincts. My daily routine is simple but satisfying. I feed the animals, maintain the equipment, tend to my vegetable garden, and keep the property in good repair. There is always something that needs fixing on a farm, but that is part of the appeal. The work connects me to this land in a way that feels increasingly rare in our modern world. At night, I fall asleep to the chorus of crickets and distant lowing of cattle rather than traffic noise or sirens. 5 years ago, things began to change when developers purchased the adjacent 100 acres to construct what they called the Sunshine Greens golf community. The marketing materials promised luxury homes surrounding an 18-hole golf course, complete with clubhouse, restaurant, and swimming pool. I watched with mixed emotions as construction crews transformed woodland and meadows into manicured lawns and artificial ponds. At first, relations with my new neighbors were cordial enough. Some residents would wave when they saw me working near the property line. A few even expressed admiration for the authentic country living my farm represented, though their tone sometimes carried a hint of condescension, as if I were a quaint museum exhibit rather than a working farmer. The first time I noticed her was on a Tuesday afternoon in April. I was repairing a section of fence when a white golf cart hummed along the cart path that ran parallel to my property line. The woman driving it wore a pink polo shirt with matching visor, large designer sunglasses, and an expression of perpetual disapproval. She slowed as she passed, openly assessing my farm with pursed lips. Something about her demeanor made me straighten my posture and nod in greeting. She returned the gesture stiffly before accelerating away. That evening, another neighbor who had become friendlier than most stopped by with a basket of muffins and a warning. "I see you met Victoria Harrington," he said, accepting the glass of lemonade I offered. "She is the HOA president. Watch yourself around her. The woman treats those bylaws like sacred texts, and she has made it her mission to ensure property values keep climbing, no matter who gets hurt in the process." I thanked him for the advice but did not think much of it at the time. My farm was not part of their community or subject to their rules. What power could she possibly have over me? In retrospect, that was my first mistake. I should have paid more attention when her golf cart began appearing near my property with increasing frequency, her gaze lingering on my barn with particular interest. When my electricity bill arrived that month, I noticed a slight increase from the previous cycle. Not enough to cause alarm, perhaps $50 more than usual. I made a mental note to check if any equipment was malfunctioning, but promptly forgot about it amid the countless other tasks demanding my attention. That small discrepancy would later prove to be the first sign of trouble to come. The morning started like any other. I woke before sunrise, pulled on my work clothes, and headed out to begin chores. As I rounded the corner of the barn to check on a loose board I had noticed the previous day, something caught my eye that seemed out of place. Against the weathered red wood of the barn wall, A thin orange line contrasted sharply with its surroundings. I moved closer, crouching down to examine what appeared to be an extension cord running along the ground. The cord extended from the exterior outlet on my barn, the one I used for power tools when working outside, and disappeared into the tall grass heading toward the property line. My first thought was that I had forgotten to put away equipment, but I knew that was not the case. I always carefully stored my tools at the end of each day. Following the path of the cord, I pushed through unmowed grass until I reached the fence line where my property met the golf course. There, clever, lie hidden behind a cluster of decorative shrubs planted by the HOA landscapers. The extension cord snaked through my fence and ended in a coiled loop with a female connector, positioned perfectly for someone to plug into it from the golf course side. Anger flared as the situation became clear. Someone was stealing my electricity, not only trespassing on my property to set this up, but deliberately hiding the evidence while helping themselves to power I paid for. The placement was too perfect to be random. This was positioned exactly where a golf cart could easily stop without being observed from my house. That evening, I installed 2 trail cameras I normally used for tracking wildlife. I positioned them with clear views of the outlet and the fence line, making sure they were well hidden in the branches of nearby trees. The cameras were motion-activated with night vision capability, perfect for catching whoever was responsible. 3 days later, I retrieved the memory cards and loaded the footage onto my computer. What I saw confirmed my suspicions and made my blood boil. The crisp digital images showed Victoria Harrington, HOA president, arriving in her golf cart 3 separate mornings. Each time, she would park near my fence, quickly glance around to ensure no one was watching, then connect her golf cart to the extension cord hidden on my property. She would then walk away, presumably to play golf or attend to HOA business, returning hours later to disconnect and drive away. The timestamps showed she was charging her cart for approximately 4 hours each time. I did some quick calculations based on the typical power consumption of an electric golf cart. While the amount per charging session was relatively small, multiplied over what appeared to be months of unauthorized use based on my electric bills, she had stolen at least several $100s of electricity. My curiosity about Victoria Harrington led me to search online for information about her. The results were illuminating. The community message board for Sunshine Greens was filled with complaints about her leadership style. Residents described receiving violations for infractions as minor as having a flower pot of the wrong color or grass that was half an inch too tall. Meanwhile, Victoria herself seemed exempt from many of the rules she enforced with such vigor. One post particularly caught my attention. Harrington issued me a $200 fine for having my grandchildren's bikes visible in my driveway for unsightly storage, but parks her golf cart wherever she pleases, including blocking the walking path by the 5th hole. The hypocrisy was staggering. I sat back in my chair, considering my options. Part of me wanted to let it go. Was this battle really worth fighting? But then I thought about the principle of the matter. This woman was not only stealing from me, but doing so while maintaining an air of superiority and disdain for the very property she was exploiting. No, this could not stand. It was time for a conversation. The next morning, I positioned myself strategically near the barn, a mug of coffee warming my hands in the cool dawn air. I had rehearsed what I would say, planning to be firm but reasonable. This did not need to escalate if she was willing to acknowledge her actions and make amends. I waited patiently, watching as the sun rose higher in the sky, painting the dew-covered grass with golden light. At precisely 7:15 a.m., right on schedule according to the patterns I had observed, the quiet hum of an electric motor announced her arrival. Victoria Harrington guided her gleaming white golf cart along the edge of the golf course. She parked in her usual spot, reached into a compartment beneath the seat, and withdrew the now familiar extension cord. As she stepped toward my fence, I emerged from beside the barn. "Good morning," I called out, keeping my voice pleasant but firm. "Beautiful day, is it not?" Victoria startled visibly, nearly dropping the cord. She quickly recovered her composure, straightening her posture and adjusting her designer sunglasses. "Oh, good morning. I did not realize anyone was around so early." I approached the fence line, coffee mug still in hand. "I am usually up with the sun. Farm life, you know." I gestured toward the extension cord in her hand. "I could not help but notice you seem to be using my electricity to charge your golf cart." Her expression shifted from surprise to something harder. "Excuse me." "The extension cord," I said, pointing to the orange cable. "It connects to my barn outlet. I have been wondering why my electricity bill has been higher lately." Victoria's laugh was short and dismissive. "Oh, that. It is just a few cents of electricity. Surely that is not a problem for you." "Actually, it is," I replied, maintaining my calm. "Any amount of electricity used without permission is still theft." Her expression darkened. "Theft, that is a very serious accusation. I would be careful about throwing around such terms." She waved her hand dismissively. "We are talking about pennies here. People like you should not be so concerned with such minor matters." "People like me," I repeated, feeling my temperature rise despite my determination to stay calm. "Rural folk," she clarified, though her tone made it clear this was not a compliment. "You have all this land, all these resources. The community brings value to your property that you never could have achieved on your own. A little electricity seems like a fair exchange." I took a deep breath. "The issue is not the amount but the principle. You did not ask permission. You deliberately hid the cord. That suggests you knew what you were doing was wrong." Victoria's posture became rigid, her jaw tightening. "Look, I am the president of the Sunshine Greens Homeowners Association. I have worked tirelessly to maintain property values and community standards. If we start examining things too closely, I might have to address some concerns about your operation here." "My farm is not part of your HOA," I stated firmly. Her smile was cold. "No, but there are county codes about agricultural properties so close to residential developments. Smell ordinances, noise regulations, visual impact considerations. It would be unfortunate if someone filed complaints about your animals being too close to our prestigious community." The threat hung in the air between us. I remained silent, processing the implied consequences. "Now," she continued, her voice softening artificially, "I think we can agree to let this electricity matter drop. It really is such a trivial thing compared to the potential issues your farm could face with the proper authorities involved." Without waiting for my response, she turned and walked back to her golf cart, leaving the extension cord untouched. "Have a wonderful day," she called over her shoulder before driving away, the soft electric hum fading as she disappeared around the curve of the golf course. I stood there for several minutes, my coffee now cold in my hand, anger building slowly but steadily. The audacity of her threat was staggering. This woman had been stealing from me for months and had the nerve to threaten my property rights when confronted. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived in my mailbox. The Sunshine Greens HOA letterhead was prominent at the top of the page. The letter claimed that my fence line was in violation of community aesthetic standards and demanded modifications within 30 days. The letter concluded with a reminder that failure to comply could result in further action being taken through appropriate channels. I held the paper in my hands, feeling a slight tremble that came not from fear but from determination. My family had owned this land for 3 generations. The farm had been here decades before the first golf ball ever flew over those manicured greens. If Victoria Harrington wanted a fight, she had just found one. But I would not be fighting on her terms. No, I would need to be smarter about this. Much smarter. The next evening, my kitchen table became command central for what was quickly developing into a community resistance movement. 3 of my neighbors from adjacent properties had joined me after hearing about my confrontation with Victoria. As it turned out, I was not the only one experiencing problems with the Sunshine Greens HOA and its president. She tried to force me to cut down my 100-year-old oak tree because leaves were blowing onto their precious golf course, said Martha, an elderly woman who had lived on her 5 acres even longer than I had been on mine. Sent me legal threats and everything. The HOA installed a drainage system that diverts water onto my property whenever it rains, added Robert, whose small horse farm bordered the western edge of the golf community. When I complained, they claimed it was a pre-existing water flow pattern. Complete nonsense. We shared stories over coffee and pie, building a clearer picture of Victoria Harrington's systematic pattern of bullying and boundary crossing. The HOA, under her leadership, had been leveraging their financial resources and connections to pressure surrounding property owners, despite having no legal authority over our lands. The following day, I visited the county record's office. After several hours of research, I emerged with photocopies of property maps and historical documents that confirmed what I already knew. My farm boundaries were clearly established decades before the development existed. More importantly, I discovered that the golf community had been required to maintain a 20-foot buffer zone between their development and surrounding properties, a requirement they had consistently ignored during construction. My next stop was to visit my old high school friend, Mark, who now worked in the county land management office. I explained the situation, showing him the documents I had collected along with photographs of the extension cord and the threatening letter from the HOA. They have absolutely no jurisdiction over your property, Mark confirmed, pointing to specific lines in the zoning regulations. And these threats about code violations are empty. Your agricultural exemption predates their development, which means your existing use is grandfathered in, regardless of any new ordinances they might try to cite. He helped me document the electricity theft properly, calculating the estimated kilowatt hours based on typical golf cart battery capacity and charging times. The dollar amount was less important than establishing the pattern of trespassing and theft. What about the fence line they are complaining about? I asked. Mark shook his head. Your fence is on your property. They have no say whatsoever in how it looks, how tall it is, or what color you paint it. Their aesthetic jurisdiction ends at their property line. Period. Armed with this information, I returned home feeling more confident but still unsure about my next steps. A legal battle would be time-consuming and expensive, even if I was in the right. I needed something more immediate and effective to stop Victoria's encroachment. That evening, I walked the pasture fence line as the setting sun cast long shadows across the field. Thor, my bull, approached along the inside of the fence, his massive head dipping in greeting as I reached out to scratch between his horns. He was an imposing animal, nearly 6 feet tall at the shoulder with powerful muscles rippling beneath his black hide. Despite his size, he was gentle with those he knew and trusted. As Thor snorted softly and pressed his head against the fence for more attention, I found myself looking between him and the spot where Victoria parked her golf cart. An idea began to form in my mind. Not a plan for confrontation or legal action, but something more natural. Something that would deliver a message in a language that even Victoria Harrington would understand. Thor was territorial but not aggressive unless provoked. He was protective of his space and made his displeasure known when strangers entered it unexpectedly. These were not flaws but natural instincts that had served his species well for centuries. Perhaps those instincts could serve me now. I looked at the section of fence that separated Thor's pasture from the area where Victoria had been parking. With some minor modifications, I could create a situation where natural consequences would speak louder than any legal threat or confrontation. Victoria Harrington needed to learn about boundaries, both literal and figurative, and I knew just the teacher for the job. The first phase of my plan required some careful modifications to my property without raising suspicion. I began by installing a more visible and convenient outlet box near the spot where Victoria had been plugging in her golf cart. The new setup looked almost professional, a weatherproof outlet mounted on a post, with a small shelf perfect for resting a charging cord. To the casual observer, particularly one blinded by entitlement, it might appear I had accepted the situation and even upgraded the facilities for easier access. In reality, the new charging station served two purposes. It created a more tempting and obvious target, and it housed one of 4 new high-definition cameras I strategically placed around the area. These cameras were significantly better than my trail cams, offering crystal-clear video with sound recording and remote viewing capabilities through my smartphone. "You really think she will keep using your electricity after you confronted her?" Martha asked when she stopped by to check on my progress. I nodded, sorting through tools on my workbench. People like Victoria do not change their behavior because someone objects. They only change when consequences become unavoidable. Right now, she thinks she intimidated me with her threats. That will make her even bolder. The most crucial modification required careful planning. The fence line separating Thor's usual pasture from the area where Victoria parked her cart was solid and well-maintained. However, I installed a new section approximately 15 feet wide with a remote-controlled gate mechanism concealed within the design. From the outside, it looked identical to the rest of the fence. From my side, I could trigger the gate to open with a simple command from my smartphone. The next phase involved Thor. While many people believe bulls are mindless, aggressive animals, they are actually intelligent creatures with predictable behaviors if you understand their psychology. Over the next week, I established a new feeding routine for Thor. Each evening at dusk, I would ring a small brass bell and then deliver his favorite treat, a special blend of sweet feed mixed with molasses, to a specific location near the new gate. It took only 3 days for Thor to make the connection. The sound of the bell now brought him trotting eagerly across the field, anticipating his reward. I gradually moved the feeding spot closer to the area where Victoria typically parked until Thor associated that entire section of the pasture with positive experiences. During daylight hours, I occasionally brought unfamiliar objects into Thor's territory: a wheelbarrow he had not seen before, a plastic barrel, an old chair, observing his reactions. As expected, he would approach new items with caution, snorting and pawing the ground, but never charging or behaving aggressively. He would circle and investigate until satisfying himself that the object posed no threat. This natural territorial behavior was perfect for my purposes. One afternoon, I invited Robert to walk along the property line while I observed Thor's reaction from a distance. The bull noticed the unfamiliar person immediately, raising his head and focusing intently on the intrusion. He moved toward Robert with purpose, not aggression, maintaining a vigilant posture that clearly communicated his role as guardian of the territory. "He is not going to hurt anyone, is he?" Robert asked nervously, though he remained safely on the other side of the fence. "No," I assured him. "He is just establishing that he notices them. Bulls are all about boundaries. They rarely attack unless something threatens their herd or their territory is violated. Even then, they usually give plenty of warning." The final element of my setup was to ensure Victoria remained oblivious to Thor's potential presence. I deliberately led him to leave evidence near the charging station, distinctive hoof prints in the soft earth, some scattered hay, and the unmistakable patties that only a bull of Thor's size could produce. Any person familiar with farm animals would recognize these signs immediately and proceed with caution. I watched through my camera feed as Victoria arrived the following day. She noticed the improved charging station with obvious satisfaction, but completely ignored the clear evidence of Thor's recent presence nearby. Her willful blindness to anything outside her narrow focus was exactly as I had anticipated. For the next week, I established a clear pattern of absence. Each morning I would drive away in my truck at precisely 8:30 a.m., returning around noon. Victoria had adjusted her schedule accordingly, now arriving to charge her cart at 9:00 a.m. when she believed the property was unattended. My cameras captured her growing comfort with the routine, her movements becoming more relaxed and entitled with each visit. The night before I planned to execute the final phase, I sat on my porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Thor grazed peacefully in the distance, unaware of the role he would play in tomorrow's lesson about boundaries and consequences. I considered, not for the first time, whether I should reconsider. Was this plan too extreme, too risky? But then I remembered Victoria's dismissive tone when she referred to people like you. I recalled her casual threats against my property rights and livelihood. I thought about my neighbors and their stories of intimidation and boundary violations. This was not about revenge, but about establishing clear and unavoidable consequences for actions that had continued despite reasonable attempts at resolution. Sometimes the most effective lessons come from nature itself, not from human institutions. Victoria Harrington had ignored property lines, warning signs, and direct confrontation. Perhaps she would pay more attention to 2,000 pounds of boundary enforcement with hooves and horns. Tomorrow would tell. The morning arrived with a misty glow covering the pastures, the kind of soft spring day that makes farm life feel especially rewarding. I moved through my chores with deliberate care, paying special attention to Thor. I gave him an extra portion of his favorite feed and spent time brushing his glossy black coat until it shone in the morning light. He leaned into the brush strokes, his massive head swinging gently with pleasure. "Big day today, buddy," I told him quietly, scratching behind his ears where he liked it best. "Nothing you need to do except be yourself." At precisely 8:25 a.m., I loaded a few empty boxes into my truck, making sure my departure was visible from the road. The cameras were all functioning perfectly, their feeds directly linked to my smartphone. The remote gate control had been tested multiple times. Everything was in place. I drove about 5 miles away to the small diner that served as our local gathering spot. Taking a booth with a clear view of my phone screen, I ordered coffee and waited. Several of the regulars greeted me as they passed, but I remained focused on the small screen propped against the sugar dispenser. At 9:07 a.m., Victoria's white golf cart appeared on the camera feed, right on schedule. SH. E moved with the confident air of someone who believed they had established dominance. Her designer golf outfit was pristine white today, crisp polo shirt, pleated skirt, and visored cap, all coordinated to match her cart. She parked in what she now clearly considered her personal spot and approached the charging station with a proprietary air. My heart raced as I watched her inspect the new setup with obvious approval. She even smiled slightly as she plugged in her cart, adjusting the cord on the convenient shelf I had installed. The entitlement was so thick it was almost visible through the camera feed. She glanced briefly toward my house, confirmed there was no movement, then turned and began walking toward the golf course, leaving her cart to charge. This was the moment. My finger hovered over the remote gate control on my phone screen. I had calculated that she would be far enough away to observe what happened, but not so far that she would miss it entirely. Timing was essential. I pressed the button. On the screen, the concealed gate mechanism activated smoothly, the section of fence swinging open into Thor's pasture. For a moment, nothing happened. Thor was grazing at the far end of the field, his back to the newly opened gate. I felt a moment of doubt, would he notice in time? Then his head came up sharply. His nostrils flared as he tested the air. Something had caught his attention, perhaps the faint electric hum of the golf cart or the unfamiliar scent of its battery system. He turned, focusing on the open gate and the strange white vehicle now visible within his domain. Thor began moving toward the gate, slowly at first, then with increasing purpose. He was not charging or showing aggression, just displaying the natural curiosity and territorial assessment typical of his species. His massive shoulders rolled as he approached, head lowering slightly to better examine this intrusion. Victoria was about 50 yards away when something made her stop and turn back toward her cart. Perhaps it was instinct, or maybe she had heard Thor's heavy hoofbeats on the soft earth. The camera caught her expression perfectly as she registered what was happening. First came confusion as she processed the unexpected sight of a massive black bull approaching her golf cart. This quickly transformed into disbelief as she realized there was now no fence separating them. Finally, her features contorted with naked fear as Thor snorted and pawed the ground beside her prized possession. No, no, no. Her voice came clearly through the camera's microphone as she began moving back toward her cart, her pace quickening with each step. Thor noticed the movement immediately. His head swung toward Victoria, his full attention now locked on the unfamiliar human rushing toward him. He responded as any territorial bull would with a warning display. He lowered his head slightly, pawing at the ground more vigorously, and released a deep, rumbling bellow that seemed to vibrate the camera. Victoria froze in her tracks, finally comprehending the situation in its entirety. She was an intruder in Thor's territory. The massive animal now stood between her and her beloved golf cart, and he was clearly communicating his displeasure with her presence. What followed was a masterclass in human panic response. Victoria's first instinct was to reach for her cart, perhaps thinking she could quickly unplug it and escape. She took 3 hesitant steps forward, then stopped as Thor shifted his position, his dark eyes locked on her every movement. She tried circling to the right. Thor moved correspondingly, not advancing toward her but ensuring she understood he was monitoring her actions. She attempted to speak in what she probably thought was a soothing tone, but her voice emerged as a high-pitched squeak of terror. "Nice bull, good bull, stay there." Thor responded with another warning snort, tossing his head for emphasis. He was not being aggressive, merely establishing boundaries in the clearest language he knew. The moment of decision registered on Victoria's face with perfect clarity. Her eyes darted between Thor and her golf cart, making calculations about risk and reward. The cart was expensive, a custom model that probably cost upwards of $7,000, but it was just property. With a sound that was half scream and half frustrated wail, Victoria turned and ran. Her white golf attire flashed in the morning sun as she sprinted across the manicured grass of the golf course, looking back repeatedly to ensure she wasn't being pursued. Thor showed no interest in chasing her. He was focused entirely on investigating the strange vehicle now in his territory. With impressive delicacy for an animal his size, Thor sniffed at the golf cart, nudging it gently with his massive head. The cart rocked slightly but remained upright. Satisfied that he had established dominance over this inanimate intruder, Thor lost interest and began grazing on the lush grass nearby, occasionally glancing up to ensure the cart maintained its submissive immobility. From my booth at the diner, I watched it all unfold exactly as I had anticipated. I took a sip of my coffee, closed the gate remotely once Thor had lost interest in the cart, and signaled for the check. It was time to go home and prepare for the inevitable fallout. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across my property as I pulled into the driveway. Thor had returned to his regular grazing area, showing no lingering interest in the incident from the morning. The golf cart remained where Victoria had abandoned it, now bearing a few muddy smudges from Thor's investigation, but otherwise undamaged. I had barely made it to my front porch when my phone began ringing. The caller ID displayed Sunshine Green's HOA office. I let it go to voicemail. Within the hour, Victoria had called 5 more times, each message more indignant than the last, culminating in explicit threats of legal action for animal endangerment and destruction of property. By evening, she had escalated to threatening immediate police involvement if I did not answer her calls. When my phone rang again just after dinner, I finally answered. "You have exactly 1 hour to explain yourself before my attorney files charges," Victoria snarled without preamble. "Your dangerous animal attacked my property. You will be paying for all damages plus emotional distress." "Good evening, Victoria," I replied calmly. "Before we continue this conversation, I would like to clarify that my security cameras captured everything that happened this morning. Would you like me to send the footage to your attorney along with all the documentation I have collected over the past several months?" A moment of silence followed. "What documentation?" Her voice had lost some of its certainty. "I will be happy to discuss that when you come to collect your golf cart. Please bring identification and proof of ownership. And Victoria, you might want to bring someone with you. For the sake of transparency, I have invited Officer Jenkins from the Sheriff's Department to be present." The following afternoon, Victoria arrived in a luxury SUV driven by a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Gerald Harrington, her husband. Officer Jenkins, a friend of my family for many years, arrived moments later. "Now," I began once everyone was seated at my kitchen table, "I believe we have several matters to discuss." I opened a folder containing printed photographs, timestamps, and calculations. "First, there is the matter of electricity theft occurring over approximately 7 months. I slid the documents toward Officer Jenkins. Victoria's face flushed. "That is ridiculous. I occasionally used an outlet that appeared to be public access." I played video footage showing her carefully concealing the extension cord and glancing around to ensure no one was watching. "This does not appear to be someone who believed they had permission," I observed. "Then we have the threatening letter regarding my fence," I continued, producing the HOA notice, "followed by verbal threats against my property when I confronted you about the electricity theft." Gerald Harrington cleared his throat uncomfortably. Victoria, is this true? They are exaggerating everything, she insisted, though with notably less conviction. As for this morning's incident, I said, playing the footage of Thor's interaction with the abandoned golf cart, you will notice several important points. First, the bull never charged or behaved aggressively. Second, the cart was not damaged beyond some mud that can be easily cleaned. Third, and most importantly, this occurred entirely on my property, where your wife was trespassing to steal electricity. Officer Jenkins reviewed the materials carefully. Ma'am, based on this evidence, you could be charged with theft of utilities, trespassing, and filing a false police report regarding the animal incident. Do you wish to pursue that course of action? Victoria's face had transformed from righteous anger to dawning horror as she realized the completeness of the documentation against her. Gerald was staring at his wife with an expression that suggested this was not the first time her actions had caused him embarrassment. I believe, Gerald said carefully, that we would prefer to resolve this matter privately. Within a week, news of the incident had spread throughout Sunshine Greens. Residents who had suffered under Victoria's rigid rule were sharing the story with undisguised glee. An emergency HOA meeting was called, and by the following weekend, Victoria Harrington had voluntarily stepped down from her position as president. 2 weeks later, a knock at my door revealed a middle-aged couple I did not recognize. The woman held a plate of homemade cookies. I am Janet Weber, she introduced herself. This is my husband Paul, we were acted as the new HOA leadership team, and we wanted to introduce ourselves properly. We also wanted to apologize for the previous administration's behavior, Paul added. The community voted unanimously to establish new guidelines for interacting with neighboring properties. We are hoping for a fresh start with clear boundaries and mutual respect. Over the following months, relations with Sunshine Greens improved dramatically. The new leadership even organized a community event where residents could visit local farms to learn about rural living. Thor became something of a local celebrity, with children from the development bringing him apples and carrots under careful supervision. One evening, as sunset painted the sky in brilliant hues, I watched Thor grazing peacefully near the repaired fence line. A golf cart hummed along the path on the other side, not white, but blue, driven by Janet Weber. She waved respectfully as she passed, carefully keeping to her side of the clearly established boundary. Thor raised his head briefly to acknowledge her presence, then returned to his grazing, comfortable in the knowledge that his territory was now properly respected by all parties. Sometimes the most effective boundaries are not the ones written in legal documents or HOA bylaws, but the ones established through natural consequences and mutual understanding. Victoria Harrington had learned that lesson the hard way. The rest of the community had been wise enough to learn from her mistake.